"Darling, your dad changed the password. I can't use his account anymore." The words rode a jagged whisper through my kitchen speaker, slicing clean through the Motown I keep low in the mornings, just enough bass to make the coffee taste like a memory. It was my daughter's voice, Ariana, breathy and tight the way it gets when she's trying to keep the peace while standing next to a storm. Through the tinny echo, I could hear him, her husband, Leon, muttering curses, drawers slamming, a door rattling in its frame like it owed him money. It was Saturday just past 9, the kind of cool Detroit morning that smells like wet concrete and a neighbor's bacon. I had just set 2 biscuits on a blue plate when the screen door on my back porch bucked under a fist I know too well. He didn't knock twice. He barreled straight through, dragging the air behind him, stinking of cologne and arrogance, his white sneakers bleeding mud on my welcome mat like it was a crime scene. "Mr. Reed," he barked, his eyes not even bothering to find mine. "You're gonna fix this. Right now." I didn't answer. I set the spatula on the stove and turned the flame low under the skillet. 74 years has taught me the price of a fast answer. He marched to the table like he'd built it, yanked out a chair, and leaned over it with both hands flat on the wood. His eyes, quick and hungry, finally scanned my face for weakness the way scavengers test fences. "Don't play with me, old man. The login's changed. The auto-pay's frozen. The card's no good." He took a sharp breath, his voice rising with indignation. "You think I'm gonna stand in mire with a full cart and look like a fool while the cashier calls for a manager?" He jabbed a finger toward the ceiling, as if there was a jury up there that understood his suffering. "Family money is family money. You sitting on it while we bleed is a sin." I let my gaze follow his finger, then travel down to his shoes, and finally rest on the little smear of green on his cuff where fresh grass said he'd cut across my lawn instead of taking the walkway. "Wipe your feet," I said. It wasn't just about the rugs, though I do care for them. It was because men like Leon believe a home is something they enter the way they enter a password. With the right code, all locks must open for them. He kicked the mat once, a pretend wipe, then folded into the chair like he expected it to kneel. Ariana hovered in the doorway, her cheeks shiny with stress, her eyes refusing to meet mine. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely a thread. "It's just until the bonus clears. 2 weeks, 1 week maybe." Leon's business had a slow quarter. Rent stacked up and the car. "The car rides fine," I said, my voice even. "It just rides in places you shouldn't be." The music from the speaker hummed on, a quiet ally in the room. I poured 2 coffees, set one in front of him, black the way he drank it, and one for me with a spoon of sugar the way Ada used to joke kept me sweet enough to keep. I've learned silence can be a house you live in. But I didn't invite Leon into that silence. "You were using my account without asking," I stated, not as a question but as a fact. "That ended last night." He laughed, a showy, chesty sound that wanted witnesses. "I've been managing your tech for a year. Who set up the bill pay? Who taught you 2-factor authentication? Who got your social security to land where it should?" He tapped his temple with a manicured finger. "I kept you from getting scammed by those fake Medicare folks. And what do I get for it? A slap in the face at the checkout line." He leaned back, trying on a smile he thought looked reasonable. "It's not like you need it, Pops. Your house is paid for. You don't eat but grits, greens, and chicken. You don't travel. You don't have hobbies besides sweeping that driveway and listening to old songs. What are you saving it for? Your tombstone?" I pushed my chair back slow, the legs groaning against the floor. I stood, not to tower over him, but to stand on my own ground in my own house. "Leon," I said, my voice low but clear, "you brought your mouth to my table and asked it to do a man's job. When you're ready to be a son-in-law instead of a prowler, you come back and knock like one." His face flushed a deep, ugly red. He stood up, his jaw clicking, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on my wooden table like he wanted to bruise it. "That's real pretty," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "So here's what's real. You log me back in or I go to probate court. I'll tell them this all smells like incompetence. I'll say you've been forgetting things, mixing up your prescriptions. I'll say I've had to handle all your affairs for months because you just can't keep up. They'll appoint a legal guardian to manage your estate, old man. And it won't be you." Ariana's breath caught like it had a hook in it. I looked at her, only at her. "You standing with that?" She shook her head, a tiny, defeated movement, like a leaf deciding it's time to fall. "I'm standing between," she said, and I knew that's where daughters drown if their fathers let them. Leon smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. You ain't seen the last of this, he said, a promise I already knew he'd keep, because wolves circle long after they give up pretending they're dogs. He pushed past Ariana and slammed the screen door behind him, leaving the scent of his cologne and the poison of his threat hanging in my kitchen. It's a special kind of boldness for a man to demand the keys to a house he never helped build. Have you ever witnessed a family member so blinded by greed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. You thought that was the beginning. But the beginning had happened long before the knock on my screen door. It began on a Tuesday in November, with rain pecking at the hospital window like someone trying to get in. My wife, Ada, was in her last hours, her voice as thin as paper, light but unterrible. I was holding her hand when she looked at me, her eyes clear as they'd ever been. Otis, she said, we don't ask anybody for what we earned. And we don't let them take it. That promise sits in my chest like a brick. After she passed, I wore a black suit so often the closet started to call it by my name. When you start paying attention to death, you start paying attention to paper. The kind that reaches for your pocket with a gentle hand and a steel grip. Grief taught me numbers the way hunger teaches wolves. I learned how invoices can talk to each other at night and breed new debt by morning. I learned that a man who thought he was a good provider can live to see a bill say otherwise. So I got to work. I paid off the second mortgage we took when the roof over the back bedroom tried to teach us about the sky. I put what was left into a little portfolio my banker, Harold, helped me build. Harold's a square-shouldered man with a barber who still uses hot towels and a razor that shines. We met when I was 30, trying to buy my first house while a man at a downtown bank called my W-2 from the Ford plant a hope. Harold looked at my hands, calloused and clean, and said, "Hands that look like yours don't bounce checks." He moved me through doors I didn't know I could open and never once asked to hold the key. When Ariana married Leon at a rented hall that served chicken like a rumor, I shook the young man's hand and felt him count my knuckles. He came with a smile as shiny as a hood after a fresh wax and a business card for a consultancy that I could never find a website for. For a while, it was little things. A charge for a streaming service I didn't sign up for. A free trial that never quit being free. A gas bill that paid itself twice, then refunded to a credit card I didn't carry. A quiet $40 here, a shrugging $69 there. I thought it was me at first. Grief makes time and commas slippery. But grief doesn't buy designer shoes on a Wednesday afternoon. It doesn't order $300 worth of sushi from a place in Ferndale at 1 in the morning. It doesn't pay a car note for a vehicle registered to a short-term LLC with a mailbox at a UPS store next to a nail salon. When I finally asked Ariana about it, she did the thing daughters do when they've chosen a man whose promises have holes you can see daylight through. "Daddy, it's all covered. Leon's handling your tech stuff now. He set up some auto this and auto that so you don't have to worry yourself with it." People say don't worry yourself when they're hoping you can be convinced to worry later when the mess is big enough to look like an accident. I knew then that asking questions would only get me more polite lies. So I stopped asking, and I started watching. And it wasn't long before I realized I wasn't the only one. My block is the kind that names its dogs after baseball players and its grandbabies after hope. We sit on porches that have seen buses miss their stops during a snowstorm, and men deliver mail in the August heat like duty is an air conditioner you carry inside your bones. We look out for each other. So when a gray Camry with a dent in the passenger door started idling across from my house 3 afternoons in a row, it didn't go unnoticed. The engine was always off, the window down just enough to pretend it was the breeze that wanted company. I'd be out sweeping the porch, and I could feel the driver's eyes on my house like a dog watching a butcher's window. On the third day, my neighbor, Ms. Dunn, was sitting on her porch swing, a Bible in her lap. She watched the Camry for a full hour, her swing making a slow, rhythmic complaint. When the car finally pulled away, she walked over, holding out the back of a Kroger receipt. She'd written the license plate number on it in neat, firm print. "That your people, Otis?" she asked, her voice low. "No, ma'am. Not mine," I said. She just nodded, tore the little piece of paper off the receipt, and handed it to me. "Well, now it's your number," she said. The fourth day, the Camry didn't come. A black SUV did. It was one of those trucks that tries to look important but just looks thirsty. 2 men in suits that didn't fit their shoulders got out and pretended to sell home safety packages to Mrs. Keel down the way. I watched from my living room window as they stood a little too close to her screen door. They were more interested in looking past her at my house than in selling her anything. Mrs. Keel called me later that afternoon. They asked when you were usually home, she said. I told them every hour of the day God gives him, and then I shut the door in their faces. You be careful, Otis. Those boys didn't smell right. That night, a cold feeling settled in my gut. This was more than Leon wanting access to my checking account. This was a campaign. He was building a story and he needed actors. I pulled the old fire safe out from under the bed and laid its contents on my dining room table like a little army of paper soldiers. The deed to the house, insurance policies, tax receipts. The last time the city appraised our place low on purpose and high by accident. I added the little brown envelope where the passwords live, the ones that matter, and the decoys that lead nowhere a thief would enjoy. I added the thumb drive my nephew in Cleveland taught me to use, the one with scans of everything twice over. Leon had threatened to paint me as a confused old man. He was gathering his brushes and his paint. I figured it was time I found a canvas of my own. The question wasn't if he would strike again. It was how he planned to do it. The cars, the men in suits, they were the opening moves in a game I didn't know the rules to yet. But I knew this much. When a wolf sends scouts, it's because he's already picked out his prize. The next morning was Sunday. I sat through the sermon on Matthew and debt with my hand wrapped around the smooth, worn edge of the pew, letting the choir lift a weight I didn't want my daughter to see in my face. After the benediction, Deacon Lewis, a man whose shoulders are as broad as his heart, touched my elbow. His eyes were soft with concern. You need anything, Brother Reed? He asked. A watchman, I said quietly. More than one if you can spare them. He didn't ask why. He just squeezed my shoulder and nodded. By that evening, 3 of them had me on a quiet rotation. Men who mow their lawns in straight lines, who wave at every passing truck, and who keep journals with dates, times, and makes and models without breaking a sweat. My next call was to Harold at the credit union. I caught him just as he was sitting down to his Sunday dinner. I didn't waste time. Harold, I said, I'm not asking you to break any rules. I'm asking you to remember how long my money has known your face. There was a pause, and then the sound of a man clearing his throat, the way men do when they are about to step more fully into your corner. Stop by my office first thing in the morning, Otis, he said. Bring the folders. You'll leave with new locks on everything. 2 nights later they came. It was just after dusk, the sky a deep bruised purple. Leon didn't bother to knock this time either. He stood on my porch flanked by the same 2 men from the black SUV, their cheap suits looking even cheaper under the yellow glow of my porch light. Elder affairs, the taller one said, flashing an ID badge that would have fooled a person who doesn't read 8-point fonts for sport. We've had reports of confusion, missed payments, a certain vulnerability. Ariana stood behind them, her hands pushed so deep into her pockets that the pockets had become fists. Daddy, she said, her voice trembling, just talk to them. It'll go better if I invite wolves to count my sheep? I asked, cutting her off, my voice harder than I intended. No, baby. I've done this before. In '68, a man with a clipboard came to our block and asked the old women how many rooms they had. In '93, another one came to measure the porches. The only thing that ever changed was the color of the clipboards. The taller one smiled, a practiced, empty gesture. Sir, we just want to make sure your finances are appropriately managed. I looked at him, then at Leon's triumphant smirk. I stepped back from the door, swinging it wider. Well then, I said, by all means, come on in. They stepped inside, their confidence filling the hallway. I gestured toward my dining room, where 4 chairs were already set around the table. They thought the chairs were for them. They thought they had me cornered. But they weren't for them. They were for the woman already seated at the head of the table. Good evening, gentlemen, she said, her voice calm and clear, a voice that could stop a freight train. Her braids fell down her back like a line of law. She slid a business card across the polished wood. My name is Marina Cole. Before you ask my client a single question, you'll be telling me where exactly in the state of Michigan's legal code your authority lives. And then you'll sit still while I dial the office of the Attorney General to confirm your badges are anything other than printer ink. The taller one's smile died like a porch light in a storm. The shorter one fumbled for his phone, pretending to receive a call. Leon's eyes darted between me and Marina, his face a mask of shock. Predators don't like it when the picnic they plan turns out to be a courtroom. Marina was polite and professional until she didn't need to be. She took their flimsy authority and pulled it apart, thread by thread, right there at my dining room table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply asked questions that had no safe answers. "Your badges?" she began, gesturing at the plastic cards they'd held up with such pride. "They list you as Senior Welfare Advocates. An impressive title. Yet the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services has no such designation. So I'll ask again. Who do you work for?" The shorter one cleared his throat. "We are a private consultancy, ma'am, contracted to..." "Contracted by whom?" Marina interrupted, her pen tapping a quiet, insistent rhythm on a yellow legal pad. "Show me the contract. Show me the court order that allows you to enter a private citizen's home and question his financial competency. Because as of this moment, you are two men in my client's house under false pretenses, which is a very short walk from criminal trespassing." She let the words hang in the air. Deacon Lewis chose that exact moment to stroll by the front window, his shadow falling across the floor. Ms. Dunn was at her kitchen sink, scrubbing the same plate for 10 minutes because sometimes a witness just needs a good reason to stand still. The men exchanged a nervous glance. Marina picked up her phone. "I have the AG's public integrity chief on my favorites list," she said conversationally. "She does so enjoy stories about men who impersonate state officials." That was it. The taller one stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. "This has been a misunderstanding," he said, all the confidence gone from his voice. "Our information was clearly faulty." They were out the door in less than 30 seconds, leaving Leon standing alone in my hallway, his face pale. The victory was clean, but it didn't feel sweet. When the door closed, Marina gathered her folders, then paused. She looked at me, her expression kind but direct. "Mr. Reed," she said quietly, "I need to ask a hard question now. These men, this entire strategy, it's built on having inside information. Has anyone inside your family given this man access to your numbers? Not just logins. The root." The room was silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. I started to say no. Of course not. But then I looked at my daughter. I looked at Ariana standing by the doorway and I saw it. I saw the way a person holds a truth like a hot coal. Not because they want to, but because the person they love told them dropping it would burn the whole house down. She cried without making a sound, her shoulders shaking. Then she gave a single tiny nod, not in denial but in complete surrender. "It was me," she whispered, the words barely audible. "It was me. When Mom got sick, we were drowning in bills. Leon said he could set up all the payments from his office so you wouldn't have to keep driving across town. He said it would help." Her voice broke. "Those afternoons you were sleeping in the hospital chair. I gave him the folder. The one from the safe. He was just supposed to take pictures of the account numbers and bring it right back. The floor I'd been standing on my whole life turned into a dock. I felt the water under it, the way it shifts, the way it reminds you that the ground beneath your feet is borrowed. My own daughter. My own girl." Marina didn't blink. She looked at Ariana and her voice was gentle. "Thank you for telling us," she said, and that's when I knew for certain I had trusted the right lawyer, because she said thank you to a confession. She turned to me. "We'll unwind it, Mr. Reed. But I need you steady now." I nodded because my father raised me to carry a beam while I cry and wipe my face after the work is done, not instead. As Ariana wiped her eyes, her phone buzzed on the hall table where she'd left it. A new message lit up the screen. It was from Leon. Marina saw it the same time I did. 5 words that made the air in the room turn to ice. "Judge Benton says we're set." Daylight came fast. So did the hearing. The courtroom was cold, the air thick with the smell of old paper and cheap floor polish. Leon wore a suit that thought it was expensive and a tie loud enough to count as testimony. He sat next to his lawyer, looking confident, occasionally glancing over at Judge Benton, who refused to make eye contact but had a slight impatient tapping of his pen. Leon's team went first. They brought 2 experts, a psychologist and a financial planner, who had never met me but spoke about my life as if they'd read it in a book. They used words like decline trajectory and impaired executive function. They tried to turn my checkbook, with its neatly recorded entries for church tithes and hardware store runs, into a medical chart proving my confusion. Every purchase, every withdrawal, was twisted into a sign of a failing mind. I sat next to Marina and listened as they tried to erase the man I was and replace him with a feeble old fool who couldn't be trusted with his own memories, let alone his own money. Then it was Marina's turn. She was a different person in that courtroom. Calm, precise, and relentless. She didn't argue with their experts, she dismantled them. For the psychologist, she produced photos of my volunteer shifts at the rec center taken just last week. "Does this look like a man in cognitive decline?" she asked. For the financial planner, she presented the binder where I keep every major maintenance receipt for my house in plastic sleeves, dating back 15 years. "Does this look like the work of a man with impaired executive function?" She played the audio recording from the day the fake agents came to my house. Leon's voice filled the courtroom clear as a bell. "Change it back or I'll make sure the state takes his toys away." Judge Benton cleared his throat like he just swallowed a dry truth. But the final blow didn't come from Marina. It came from Ms. Dunn. When Marina called her to the stand, Ms. Dunn walked up with the quiet dignity of a woman who has paid her taxes on time for 50 consecutive years. She smoothed out her Sunday dress, took her oath, and looked Judge Benton right in the eye. Leon's lawyer tried to dismiss her as a nosy neighbor. "So, you just sit on your porch and watch Mr. Reed's house all day?" Ms. Dunn smiled sweetly. "Son, I sit on my porch and watch the whole world. Mr. Reed's house just happens to be part of it." The gallery chuckled. She then recounted, in meticulous detail, the comings and goings of the gray Camry. "That car sat there for 3 hours and 12 minutes on Tuesday," she said, peering over her glasses. "The fella in it smoked 2 menthols and a cigarillo and had a cough like he owed it money." She wasn't done. "And on Thursday, 2 boys in suits that didn't fit came by in a big black truck. They looked more like they were casing the joint than selling anything." When it was over, the judge had no choice. He looked irritated, like his golf game had been publicly ruined. He dismissed the petition, scolding Leon for causing familial disturbances and advising him to seek legitimate remedies for his financial issues. It was a slap on the wrist, a warning to a man who doesn't hear warnings until they're dressed up like consequences. Leon left with his jaw set like a stapler. Ariana didn't leave at all. She just sat in the emptying courtroom and cried into her hands. I sat next to her and put my arm around her shoulder. "You're still my girl," I said. "But love ain't a shield for a thief." We walked to the parking lot slow because fast is for people who have someplace better to be. And there, waiting on the windshield of my old truck, was a plain white envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with no stamp and no return address. One line was written in a heavy, angry scrawl. "You think you've won. Next time you won't see me coming." I stood there holding that piece of paper, the wind whipping at the edges. They say justice is blind, but sometimes you have to force its eyes open. If you believe that a person's self-respect is a right worth defending, subscribe to this channel for more stories of quiet strength winning the day. Wolves announce themselves with growls so their pack can hear. Men like Leon write it down so they can read it later and feel brave. That note on my windshield was a promise, but it wasn't the end of his foolishness. It was just the end of his pretense. Marina Cole, bless her heart, wasn't one to sit still. That handwritten threat invigorated her. She pulled a thread on one of those shell LLCs Leon had set up to funnel my auto-pay scripts, and she watched it all come apart. That thread led to a cousin in Dearborn, a man who had opened 3 lines of credit using my numbers, all linked to a burner phone billed to a storage unit near 8 Mile. When the FBI field office followed the cousin's truck to that storage unit, what they found wasn't cash or stolen checks. It was equipment, the kind that takes numbers and makes them into a second false life. Card embossers, skimmers, a laptop running scripts that could scrape a grandmother's light bill portal and turn it into a gas receipt in another county. There were 2 worn leather folders, each with a neat little family tree of logins and helpful hints, written in Leon's blocky hand. One entry read, "Otis, slow to answer unknown numbers. Likes cash withdrawals at teller, won't use ATM after dark." They called it a ring. I called it a hunger with business cards. Marina let the agents do their work. I stayed out of it, mostly except where daylight needed a mouth to say a thing decent. The news of the federal raid hit the local channels like a bombshell. Suddenly, Leon went quiet. That's how you know a man isn't sleeping as well as his mouth used to. In the quiet aftermath, Ariana moved into my guest room with a single suitcase and an apology that felt too heavy for words. We learned how to co-parent silence without smothering it. I cooked us fried catfish on Fridays the way Ada liked it, Cornmeal thin so it shatters, hot sauce the cheap kind that grew up in my pantry. We ate on the back steps with our feet on the lower plank and our plates on our knees and let the humid Detroit air do some of the work grief leaves behind. We watched the sun set. We just were. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous. Leon tried once more, not with a gavel or a fake badge, but with gossip. He sent messages to cousins down in Toledo, to folks we see at the apple orchard every fall, telling them I'd lost my mind. He claimed I was letting outsiders take my legacy, that I was punishing an honest man trying to take care of his family. The block didn't buy it. The church didn't buy it. But rumors don't need belief to travel, they just need feet. Then one evening, as the crickets sang their late summer song, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't know. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. A man breathing like he'd been running, though he hadn't moved an inch. You brought cops into this. You think that saves you? I got friends with robes. I got friends with badges. I got friends who don't need either. Click. Marina forwarded everything to the FBI case agent. Harold added a note to my account that made bankers act like airport metal detectors. Deacon Lewis started parking his pickup across my driveway after sunset. Ariana took a job at a clinic on the other side of town and started carrying a key fob that made a sound like hope when it touched the door. It was clear, Leon was still out there and he was not alone. The threat was no longer just from my son-in-law, it was from an entire network, and it felt more dangerous than ever. I'd lived long enough to know when a storm is a storm, and when a storm is a signal. The gossip Leon was spreading, the veiled threats on my phone, they were meant to isolate me, to make me doubt the community that stood with me. But my Ada taught me better. When the neighborhood got loud, she didn't run. She invited it to dinner. So I did the same. I filled 2 long folding tables in the backyard with food that smelled like home and tasted like love. Collards so soft the spoon kept slipping down. Mac and cheese that held a square like it studied geometry. Cornbread that forgave every sin but being dry. And a peach cobbler with a crust that sang when you cracked it, a recipe passed down through generations. People came from all over the block, from the church, from Mariana's old school. They came with smiles and empty plates, and the quiet understanding that something was happening, and I was giving them the truth, seasoned with good food. I said grace slow because gratitude deserves grammar. Then, as the plates were being passed for seconds, I stood. I didn't use names. That wasn't the point. The point was the warning, not the headline. There are men, I said, my voice carrying over the gentle hum of conversation, who think being useful means being the one who holds the passwords. They believe that if they control the numbers, they control the man. There are daughters who think love and safety can grow in the same garden, even when the seeds are poisonous. There are houses that forget to lock their doors because they believe the thief lives outside, not in the guest room. I paused, letting my words sink in. Don't let grief make you generous with the wrong keys. People nodded. People ate. People carried leftovers home in foil that looked like silver. The truth, simply told, was a dish everyone understood. By the time the plates were washed and stacked to dry, the air felt lighter, the community's resolve stronger. My home felt more like a fortress than ever, not because of locks, but because of love. But peace, even when earned, is sometimes fragile. Later that evening, just as the last of the guests waved goodbye, I found a package sitting on my porch swing. It was heavier than it should have been, taped shut like whoever taped it didn't like to let go. My name was written on it in a careful hand, a hand I knew from the note on my windshield, from the old financial records I'd seen. The community's protection felt suddenly fragile against such a direct and personal intrusion. The piece had been a temporary gift, and the unsettling message on the porch swing was a reminder. Some wolves don't growl. They send mail. The question now was, what kind of message did he want me to receive this time? We brought the package inside and set it on the dining room table, right where Marina Cole had sat and dismantled Leon's lies. It felt heavier than it should, not with weight, but with intent. Ariana slit the tape with a paring knife, her hand steady in a way that made me proud. There was no weapon inside. There was something worse. The first thing we pulled out was a ledger book, the old kind with green lines and columns for debts and credits. The cover was worn smooth, stained with what looked like coffee and thumb oil. I opened it. It was full of names I didn't know and dollar amounts that looked like quiet, desperate loans. It was a book of secrets, just not mine. It was meant to confuse, to make me feel like I was losing my grip on what was real and what wasn't. I set it aside. Underneath the ledger was a single photograph, tucked into a protective plastic sleeve. My breath caught in my chest. It was me and Ada sitting on our porch swing in the summer of '89. We were both laughing, a full-throated laugh at something our neighbor's boy had just shouted from his bicycle. I remembered the moment like it was yesterday, the smell of cut grass, the taste of lemonade, the weight of my hand on her knee. It was a perfect memory, a moment of pure, untroubled joy. And he had defiled it. Scrawled across the bottom of the photo in the same thick, angry ink from the note on my truck were 4 words that felt like a physical blow. I found your other door. My hand shook. This wasn't about money anymore. This wasn't about a house. This was a violation of the sacred. He had reached into my past and put his dirty hands on the one thing I had left that was truly mine. He was weaponizing my love for my wife against me. Ariana made a small wounded sound in the back of her throat and put her hand on my shoulder. "Don't let him, Daddy," she whispered. "Don't let him get in." I took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded. I carefully slid the photograph out of its sleeve and placed it face down on the table. As I did, I felt something else inside the ledger. Tucked between 2 pages, almost invisible, was a thin, plain envelope. My fingers felt clumsy as I opened it. Inside was not another note, but a single, untraceable brass key. It was a standard hardware store cut, a key that could belong to anything, to anyone. It was anonymous and cold. "What is it?" I wondered aloud, turning it over in my palm. It felt heavier than a piece of brass had any right to be. Ariana took it from me, her brow furrowed in concentration. She ran her thumb over the ridged edges and the small, stamped number on its head. "This is for a storage lock," she said, her voice certain. "One of the old ones. Like the unit we rented when we were clearing out Grandma's house." She looked at the envelope. There was a number written on the inside flap, a combination of a letter and 3 digits. F217. It wasn't a code. It was a location. A destination. Leon was leading us somewhere. He was inviting us to open another door. The question hung in the air between me and my daughter, cold and sharp as the key itself. Was it a trap? Or was it an answer to a question we were too afraid to ask? Either way, we both knew we had to find out what was behind that lock. Marina Cole's advice was simple and firm. "You don't go anywhere near that place, Mr. Reed. You let the professionals handle it." For once, I didn't argue. The key and the unit number were handed over to the FBI agent assigned to Leon's case. I stayed home, trying to scrub the image of those 4 words on my wife's memory from my mind. 2 agents went to the storage facility, a desolate place off I-75 with rows of metal doors the color of a Band-Aid and cameras that blinked like they were trying their best to stay awake. They cut the old lock on unit F217 and slid the metal door up with a groan that echoed in the empty lot. The call from the case agent came an hour later. His voice was different. The professional tone was still there, but it was underlined with something else, a note of grim disbelief. "Mr. Reed," he said, "the unit doesn't contain any criminal equipment. No cash, no machines." "What's in it then?" I asked, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "Paper," he said after a long pause. "Boxes and boxes of it. Phew. It's your life on paper." He described the scene. Boxes filled with old bills of mine, some of them going back years. Contracts I'd signed. Canceled checks. And dozens of fraudulent credit applications with names of other victims cut out and my information pasted in like a child's cruel craft project. It was a library of his crimes, a museum of his deceit. But the centerpiece, he said, was a spiral notebook lying on an old folding table in the middle of the room. It was filled with meticulous, handwritten notes. It was a surveillance log. My log. Page after page detailed my comings and goings. Leaves for church 8:45 a.m. Sunday. Sweeps porch 4 p.m. daily. Ms. Dunn visits with pie, stays 22 minutes. There were sketches of my house, with arrows pointing to the windows and doors, notes on the locks, observations on when the streetlights came on. He hadn't just been a thief. He had been a student of my life. A stalker. The full, chilling extent of his fixation was laid bare in that dusty, forgotten room. This was a man who hadn't just wanted my money. He had wanted to own my existence, to know every rhythm and routine of my world so he could dismantle it at his leisure. The crime wasn't just financial. It was deeply, personally psychological. "There's one more thing, Mr. Reed," the agent said, his voice dropping lower. "The last page of the notebook. There's a fresh entry. The ink is still shiny. I held my breath. It's not a note, he said. It's an appointment. He read it to me. Sunday, 2:15 p.m. A cold shock went through me. I looked at the calendar hanging in my kitchen. Today was Saturday. The appointment wasn't in the past. It was imminent. The story had caught up to the present. The final confrontation was now just hours away. Sunday arrived not with a storm, but with the quiet reverence of a Detroit morning. The sun cast long, gentle shadows across my lawn. The air was still, but the peace was a thin blanket over a bed of nails. We were all waiting. I sat in my armchair, the one where I'd breastfed my son so many years ago, and let the low, steady beat of Motown fill the room. I was not a man in hiding. I was a man on his own porch, refusing to be chased out. Ariana was in the kitchen, making a pot of coffee we didn't need, her hands needing a task to keep them from trembling. Outside, the watchmen were in place. Deacon Lewis's old pickup was parked across the street, him sitting in it, reading the Sunday paper. Ms. Dunn's curtains were parted just enough. The grandfather clock in the hall marked the passing of time, each tick a heavy footstep approaching my door. 1 o'clock, then 1:30. At 2:10, the gray Camry made one slow pass down the block, a silent, final inspection. Then it was gone. The clock began to chime the quarter hour. 2:15. I held my breath. The house was silent. The music had faded out between songs. I waited for a knock, a crash, the sound of a window breaking. Nothing. The chimes faded, and the silence that followed was heavier than any sound could have been. 2:16. 2:17. Ariana came and stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with a question. Was it a bluff? She whispered. Was it all just to scare you? I didn't have an answer. A confusing wave of relief and anticlimax washed over me. Had we prepared for a battle that was never coming? Just as I began to let the tension in my shoulders ease, the phone on the end table rang, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the quiet. It wasn't the police. It was Harold. Otis, he said, his voice urgent, cutting straight to the point. Don't panic. We stopped it. But you need to know the attack was real. What attack, Harold? I asked, my mind still braced for a physical threat. Nothing happened here. Not at your house, Otis, he said, and I could hear the clicks of his keyboard in the background. The attack was on your foundation. The other door Leon was talking about, it wasn't wood. It was digital. At exactly 2:15 p.m., a massive, automated wire transfer was triggered. The order was to liquidate your entire portfolio and move it to an untraceable offshore account. The room tilted. The air left my lungs. But the trap failed, Harold continued, his voice tight with satisfaction. The moment the script activated, the FBI flag we placed on the account froze the transaction. The attempt itself, with its specific timing, was the final piece of evidence they needed. They were monitoring it in real time. He took a deep breath. Federal agents picked up Leon and his cousin 20 minutes ago in a rented office space in Southfield. They were sitting there watching a screen waiting for the money to land. They got him, Otis. They got him. I sank back into my chair, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. He had been outsmarted. The man who saw me as a relic, a confused old man who couldn't handle his own affairs, had been defeated in the digital world he thought he owned. Justice hadn't needed to knock. It had been waiting quietly behind a firewall. 6 months passed. The seasons turned, taking the last of the summer heat with them and leaving the crisp, clean air of autumn in its place. The legal process, with its grinding, methodical pace, had finally concluded. Leon was sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary for a list of charges that took the judge a full 5 minutes to read aloud: aggravated identity theft, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and several others. The cousin received a lesser sentence for his cooperation. The case was closed. In the quiet after the storm, our house began to heal. Ariana and I found our way back to each other, not with grand apologies or tearful conversations, but through the small, shared rhythms of daily life. We started in the garden, Ada's old garden, which had grown wild with neglect. We spent weekends pulling weeds, turning the soil, our hands in the same dirt. We didn't talk much at first. We let the work do the talking for us. We planted bulbs for the spring, a silent promise of a future. We cooked Ada's recipes. Ariana, who had never shown much interest in the kitchen, now stood beside me, learning the right amount of butter for the cornbread, the secret to getting the catfish crust to shatter just so. We ate on the back steps the way we used to, and learned how to fill the silence not with sorrow, but with the comfortable peace of just being. She took a job at a clinic on the west side, a place that served families who had little but needed a lot. It was hard work, but it was honest. I saw a change in her, a strength in her shoulders that wasn't there before. She started therapy, facing the hard truths about the choices she had made, about the man she had allowed to poison our family. She was taking responsibility, not just for her mistakes, but for her own healing. One evening, as we sat on the porch swing, watching the leaves turn brilliant shades of red and gold, she turned to me. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "for not seeing, for not believing you." I put my arm around her and pulled her close. "You're my girl," I said, "and you're home. That's all that matters now." The past was a scar, but it was no longer an open wound. We were learning that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to build something new on the ground where something old had broken. 1 year later, my world is both the same and entirely different. The house still stands on its quiet block. The porch swing still makes its gentle complaint on warm evenings. The low, steady rhythm of Motown still hums from the kitchen speaker in the mornings. But the silence in the house is no longer a space I co-parent with grief. It's a comfortable quiet, filled with the peace that comes after a long, hard-won fight. I didn't just reclaim my life. I found a new purpose in the wreckage Leon left behind. Twice a month, on Tuesday afternoons, I head down to the community center with Harold from the credit union. We run a workshop for the seniors on our side of town. We call it the Digital Watchman. I'm not an expert, not like the young people are, but I can tell a story. I stand in front of folks I've known my whole life, women who taught my daughter in Sunday school, men I worked alongside at the plant, and I tell them about the quiet ways that wolves learn to knock on digital doors. I talk about passwords that are prayers, and about emails that look like friends but are strangers with their hands out. Harold handles the technical parts, explaining firewalls and two-factor authentication with the same steady calm he used to explain my first mortgage to me all those years ago. We teach them to be their own watchmen. We've turned my greatest vulnerability into our community's strength. My story became a lesson, a warning that helps keep the wolves from other people's fences. Tonight, the air is cool and smells of coming rain. I'm on my porch, watching the last of the evening light fade from the sky. A car pulls up to the curb and Marina Cole gets out. She's not here on business anymore. She's just a friend stopping by with a bag of fresh peaches from the market. She sits with me for a while and we talk about nothing and everything. Her son's college applications, my new tomato plants, the ridiculous price of eggs. We don't talk about Leon. We don't have to. His name is a closed chapter in a book I no longer read. As she gets up to leave, she gestures to my home, bathed in the warm glow of the porch light. "You fought hard for this house, Otis," she says, her voice soft. I look at the sturdy brick, at the windows where Ada and I watched our children grow, at the door that held firm against the worst kind of storm. I fought for the papers, for the numbers in the bank, for the deed with my name on it. But that was just the battlefield. The victory was something else entirely. It was this: the quiet, the peace. The knowledge that the foundation was secure, not just from thieves but from fear. They say a man's home is his castle. But I learned it's more than that. It's a library of promises, and it's our job to be the librarian. What promises in your life are you fighting to keep? Let's talk about it in the comments.